We continue now with a look at a new way state lawmakers are stepping in, they say, to keep kids safe. They're talking about concussions. Every year, about 100,000 high school student athletes get a concussion playing sports. And records show as many as 40% of them return to action too soon. Some legislators are taking notice and now taking action.
The coach does not put the player back in, whether it be at practice or in the middle of a game, not put the player back in until that player is medically cleared to play.
The proposed legislation that they're calling "When in Doubt, Sit It Out" would automatically bench those with signs of a concussion for at least 1 day. Oregon and Washington are the only other 2 states in the nation with a similar law. Joining me now to talk about the need, Doug Bowie, who's an athletic trainer and the regional director for Select Physical Therapy and NovaCare Rehabilitation. Also, Julie Peters, she's the executive director of the Brain Injury Association of Connecticut. Thanks both for being here. If we could start out, let's get back to those numbers, talking about how many young athletes are suffering concussions and how many are and not knowing it.
We just talked about this off the air, and you know, some of the numbers you get is over 100,000 brain injuries or concussions annually, and the scary part about that is that's probably what's just being reported or recognized, and there are countless numbers above that that are going unreported, unrecognized, undiagnosed, and untreated.
Is that because people don't realize that they have it, that they've had a concussion, or?
I think that's part of it. One of the things that we try to get out is that concussions are a brain injury, and people don't realize that. And there's also a lot of myths about concussions. One of them is that you have to lose consciousness in order to sustain one, or that you actually have to hit your head. A strong jolt to a part of the body that moves your head can cause a concussion. And so a lot of people don't actually understand the signs and symptoms of a concussion, and so they don't get reported, or they don't feel some of the symptoms until later and realize that something might be up. So we know that the numbers are far greater than what's being reported.
What are those signs and symptoms that kids or parents would be looking for?
Yeah, they're a wide variety of signs and symptoms, and they can range from anything as mild to a headache, change in personality, confusion, dizziness. Just a person's temperament, your student athlete's temperament can be different too, as severe as loss of consciousness.
And what's the risk if they do get back in the game too soon?
Yeah, well, when people return, or student athletes return to activity too soon, that can compound the symptoms that they're having. And we know from the latest research that adolescent and child brains are still developing, and so their brain is going to respond differently than a professional athlete's or an adult athlete's brain. Because of that development, they're going to recover much more slowly, and any sort of injury or second injury is going to interfere with that development.
So what's the standard? So if your child has any sort of a jolting injury in a practice or a game, you should get them checked out, or just watch for the signs, or?
Yeah, I think it goes back to symptom recognition, and that's what this legislation is really pushing. It's the recognition of those signs and symptoms by parents, officials, coaches, and the public, and then removing those athletes from play, then referring them off to a qualified healthcare professional for treatment.
Why take the step to get lawmakers involved? I mean, couldn't raising public awareness or even, you know, rules on the school level, wouldn't that be effective?
I think legislation is necessary at this point because of the severity. The recognition has to be, the awareness of recognition of these symptoms has to be heightened, and I think the legislation is the best way to do that at this point.
Now, is this similar? Isn't the NFL talking something about having players self-report or report each other if they think they see players suffering signs?
The NFL has been at the forefront of this just because of the nature of the sport. I mean, from the start of neurocognitive testing, keeping baselines on players and monitoring them annually, they've really done a good job and deserve a lot of credit for that. And they've really started to be able to educate their players on the long-term ramifications if these go undiagnosed and untreated. So they've done a good job of trying to get them to self-police.
Do you think that there are cases in Connecticut where, I mean, I'm sure it does happen, where athletes are wanting to get back in, or coaches are wanting to get them back in?
Oh, certainly. I think it happens every day. We talked about this earlier as well.
Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons the legislation is so important, is that we get the information out there, because so many coaches and parents really don't have the correct information about concussions. And so making sure that coaches are trained, making sure that medical professional is allowing the student athlete to go back to play, those are really important, because as Doug said, young brains are very different from even those in the NFL. It takes longer to heal many times, and the dangers of a second concussion when your brain has not healed from the first one are significant. It's called second impact syndrome, and it is very serious and can result even in death.
Wow. So do you expect pushback? I guess anytime there's proposals at the Capitol, there's pushback. But I mean, have you heard that there is anticipated pushback from anyone?
You know, we really haven't. We've heard, one of the things that is exciting about this and what we've seen in Oregon, where they passed this legislation recently, it was passed with 100% in favor of it. And I think because people realize that this is something important, we're trying to protect the safety of our athletes. And I think that's a reason people will be behind it.
Interesting. Well, we'll watch to see what happens. Thanks again, both of you. Good information from athletic trainer Doug Bowie and also from Julie Peters, who's the executive director of the Brain Injury Association of Connecticut. Thanks again. Ahead, the WNBA and USA Basketball are bringing an all-star game to Connecticut. The question is, can we keep them here?